I am a survivor of child sexual abuse and trafficking in my own family. And in this video, I want to share with you my journey to heal from my C-PTSD, or my complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And in particular, I want to share with you how I came to know that I was sexually abused and trafficked as a child, my journey to find the right therapist, and how I was able to begin to recover some of my repressed memories. And most importantly, I want to share with you how I was able to find my voice again in order to start this YouTube channel. And I'm going to do this in a question and answer format. And what I've done is I've selected a number of questions that I've been asked by other people along my healing journey. So let's get started. Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new to my channel, I want to welcome you. Don't forget to subscribe so you can get further notifications of other videos that will be coming out. My name is Carole, and I'm the founder of CaroleCares. You can also find me on my website, CaroleCares.com, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. If you are thinking of self-harming right now, please hit the video link above at any time during this video. So let's begin with question number 1. Tell me about yourself and why you started the YouTube channel CaroleCares. As some of you may know, I'm a retired French and English teacher in Ontario, Canada, and I taught high school for 30 years. And I think it was probably in the last 5 to 10 years of my teaching career where I really started to notice that students were really struggling with their mental health. And in particular, a lot of students were struggling with anxiety and depression. A number of students were also struggling with attendance issues. But as a teacher, I was in a position where I really couldn't help these students. And to be honest with you, I don't know if a lot of them were getting the help that they really needed. And some of them wanted. And I think a part of the reason why I started to really notice my students' mental health challenges was because I myself was in intensive therapy in the last few years of my teaching. I didn't really know what I was going to do in my retirement, but I knew that I wasn't done working with this age group. So about a year and a half after I retired, I set up this YouTube channel. And my hope was that teens and young adults would be able to come to my channel, and that would be a safe place for them where they could get some help with their mental health challenges. I wanted to provide some tools for them and a safe environment so that they could get the courage to start to deal with their own mental health challenges. What were some of the mental health challenges that you saw in the classroom that your own students faced? I think the biggest mental health challenge that I saw was the anxiety that students were facing. For a lot of them, they had performance anxiety, they had difficulty writing tests. I remember having some students that couldn't go without a phone and had to keep in contact with their parents at all times. I think because of the high anxiety that students were facing, they also had a lot of relationship issues, dealing with their friends, dealing with home life. Depression was definitely a health challenge for a lot of these students. As I mentioned earlier, attendance was definitely a big problem, and students missed a lot of school. In the city that I taught in, there were a number of students, unfortunately, who had committed suicide, and a number of students were attempting suicide. That was an extreme wake-up call for myself, and I think for a lot of individuals in our city, because the teens were screaming for help. Dating, breakups, body image, eating disorders, bullying, definitely issues that were coming up while I was teaching. You could see that students were struggling with substance abuse because they're looking for a way to numb out their pain. In the last 10 years of my teaching career, a number of students were starting to struggle with their sexual identity, and students were starting to come out. And the reason why they struggled with their mental health was because they didn't have the tools to deal with the emotions that were coming up. And that's why you'll notice on my YouTube channel that a lot of my videos are talking about how to deal with your emotions. You talked about the challenges that your students face growing up. So what was your own childhood like? Let me just start off by saying that I don't remember my childhood. I remember certain incidents from school, but my actual home life, I don't remember, which is very common with people that come from trauma. I came from a very chaotic household. My father was an alcoholic, and he came home drunk every second day. So from one minute to the next, I never knew what to expect. So I lived in a real high anxiety, stressful situation. I remember that I was always embarrassed to bring anyone home because I was scared that my father might show up drunk. So rather than act out, which is sometimes what some of my students did to seek attention because they needed help, I went inward and I hid, and I created this wall around me because I was really scared. And like I said, I didn't know what to expect from one minute to the next. So in order to keep my own self safe, I had to create this wall around me. I lived a very sheltered existence in high school, and in university. In high school, I always had one friend that I trusted, and that was it. So I'm going to say that I lived in a state of very high anxiety. But growing up, the word anxiety wasn't a word that was used at all. And there wasn't that mental health awareness like they have today. So I know that I would have lived with a great deal of anxiety and depression, and just absolutely frightened to step out of my comfort zone, which was the wall that I had created around myself. How did your own childhood environment affect you as an adult? My sheltered existence continued after high school. I went to university, but I met no one. I went to no parties. I look back on those times, and people that know me now are kind of shocked that that's the existence that I lived. But I didn't know. I was just trying to keep myself safe. I had a boyfriend, and he was my existence. I had a very difficult time trusting anyone, and the world was a very unsafe place for me. But I've always felt that there was something wrong with me. My search to find out what was wrong with me is really what led me to get some help for my mental health. My eating disorder was definitely my number one clue that there was something going on with me inside. Eating was my drug. It's always been my drug of choice. I'm a binge eater and an overeater. I've spent pretty much my entire life battling my overeating. It was out of control, and I would eat to the point of vomiting sometimes. I've also always had this, I'm going to say, this low-level depression. Now, throughout my years of trying to find a therapist, I've had a couple therapists tell me that you're depressed. But I functioned every day. I got up, I taught, I raised 3 kids, and I didn't think I was depressed. But I knew it was a real battle to just get through every single day of my life. And so what I didn't know, what I didn't realize, that I was living in depression, and I think it had become my norm, and it took all the energy I had just to battle it every single day. I literally just plowed through life. I never really identified as depression. In fact, I did go to the doctor once after a couple therapists had said, you have depression. And, he did this checklist with me, and he just basically said, you have 3 kids, you're tired, you're not depressed. And so I was never put on any medication. But I lived in a real state of hypervigilance, which meant I was always on guard. I was very observant, and I always watched everything around me. I was overprotective with my own children. So as I grew older, I started to recognize more that I had anxiety. Because like I said, we didn't have a label for it growing up. I was noticing my depression a lot more, and I'd sort of fall into these states of what I called the blues, and they might last for 3 or 4 days. When you're raising 3 kids and have a full-time career, your main focus is just on survival. And I think all I was trying to do was survive with this level of anxiety and depression in my system. It takes a lot of energy to keep everything just repressed and keep everything down. And this is what was happening with me, but I didn't know. So how did you start to get help with what you were feeling? So asking for help as a child was definitely not a thing. So I didn't get any help when I was a child. But I think the first time I actually sought help was when I first got married. I knew I needed help. I've always said that. I knew there was something wrong with me. I just knew that I just felt really crazy in my head, if I had to describe it as that. And I don't like to use that word because I was called that by my abusers when I was younger. But I really felt that my world was out of control. And I could feel it. And the one way that you're going to find out quickly is to get married, move to a new city, start a new career, and that'll get you out of control. And I was out of control. So when I first got married, the city I was living in had a rehab facility. I contacted that facility because I was looking for help for adult children of alcoholics. And I was very lucky because they had an outpatient program where I could go and get help. So I think it was sort of like a 6-week program. And that was my first taste of starting to get help for myself. And that's when I first started writing a little bit about some of the feelings that were coming up for me. So I left that program, and I continued to try to deal with my depression, deal with my anxiety, and I shoved everything down with food. So it probably wasn't until a couple years later, when I moved into another city, that I decided to start looking for a therapist. I went to so many therapists, and I think at one point it was to get help for my relationship with my husband, so we did go to a bit of marriage counseling. But again, the therapist looked at me and pointed the finger at me and said, "I'm depressed." That was always a shock to me because I didn't think I was depressed. But again, I didn't know this was my way of functioning every day. So finally in the year 2000, I just wasn't getting the help I needed because, to be honest with you, I didn't know what was wrong with me. I always thought it was because of my father's alcoholism that I had problems, which, yes, that's true. But I had no memories of my childhood. I had no idea that there was this complex trauma that was just sitting inside of me with these repressed memories that needed to get out. No idea. So in the year 2000, I decided to get help for my eating because I knew that was a problem. So I joined what was called Overeaters Anonymous, which is this 12-step program like Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, we read from the big book, we followed all the traditions and all the steps, and I worked through the steps. I found myself a really good sponsor who's a support that you can find in the program itself, who has been in the program for a while, and she was great. She sort of became my eating therapist for 10 years. And you know, I want to say to you that things happen for a reason. There was a reason I was supposed to be in OA. It was what I needed at the time, and it was what I was willing to start to deal with at the time. And that's, I guess, the word of advice that I can give you. You begin where you are. And if it means that you have to deal, start to maybe deal with your eating disorders, and that's what you deal with. Or if you have to deal with your anxiety, then that's what you're going to deal with, or your depression. For me, it was my eating, and that's what I wanted to tackle. And that ended up being probably the best decision of my life. I attended Overeaters Anonymous from 2000 to 2010. So I was in it for 10 years. And probably when I was 3 or 4 years into it, I decided to go to a conference with my sponsor. And it was an OA conference. It was a weekend conference. I was quite excited to go because I wanted help. And I was really eager to get help. And I remember on the Saturday night, we were in this big room, and there was a panel of people at the front, and they started to talk about their childhood sexual abuse. And I remember that they were going through each speaker, and each speaker was telling their story, but I couldn't remember what they were saying. And I was dissociating, but at the time I didn't know what that was, which meant that I had left my body and something was happening here. And remember, this was an eating conference, and they were talking about sexual abuse. And I remember turning to my sponsor at the time, and thankfully she was there with me. And I looked at her and I said, what the hell does sexual abuse have to do with overeating? And I could just feel the anxiety in my system rising and rising. And I was whimpering. I started to whimper like a little child. And I'm looking around, and there was no one else that had the same reaction as me that I could see. And all of a sudden, I lost it. I ran out of that room as fast as I could. I don't know how I found my room because I don't have a good sense of direction, but somehow I found my room, got into that room, sat on my bed, and my sponsor followed me into that room. The next thing I know is that I squealed at the top of my lungs, and I don't know where this was coming from. It was a crying, but it was a shrieking. And I remember staring at this garbage bin, and I wanted to get up and just puke my guts out. Now, for anybody that thinks that a sexual abuse survivor makes any of this up, there was no way in hell that I could have acted what had just happened. I didn't know what was going on. This was the first time that anything like this had happened to me, that I had cried like that. I'm going to say squealed like that. It was such a high-pitched squealing. And all I know is that the main speaker of the conference that weekend came to my room. Obviously, I mean, in hindsight, I know now that all those people, that whole panel of people, had triggered the fuck out of me. And that's all I can say. And that's what happened. And that's why I left. At the time, I didn't know what triggering was. They knew exactly what was going on with me, and that's why they came to my room. The speaker came, and I remember just squealing and crying, and I obviously felt like I was in good hands. I felt safe with my sponsor and this speaker that had come to see me. And when it was all said and done, when I had finished squealing and crying and sort of composing myself once again, I looked at the speaker and I said, does that mean I've been sexually abused? I don't think she said yes, but she said there is a strong possibility that you were abused. And I remember this whole feeling of relief came over me, because for the first time in my life, I knew what was wrong with me. And as much as it was that painful, it was so much relief to know what was wrong with me. And I spent the whole night in shock. I remember going to take a shower, just taking care of myself. I was up all night crying, holding on to myself. I remember being in my pink house coat that night and just holding on to myself and being there for me. This is what happened to me. I was sexually abused. I'm like, holy shit. I knew there was something wrong with me, and I knew that I finally got the answer. This was the answer. And I remember feeling, for the rest of the weekend, I was still in a lot of shock. But I remember thinking, I can't wait to go home and tell my husband and tell some people what I know. What's wrong with me? This is what's wrong with me. This is what's been wrong with me all my whole life. This is why I'm the way I am. This is why I'm depressed. This is why I have this high anxiety. This is why I fly off the handle with my kids. This is why I have difficulty with relationships. This is why I scream at kids at school. This is why. This is what's wrong with me. I was sexually abused. And it just seemed to be the answer to everything. And I was going with it because that's all I had. Because I knew there was something wrong with me. I knew there was a reason why I ate the way I ate, to the point of wanting to puke. And I do want to say that I did know at this time that there was one sibling in my family who had admitted to being sexually abused by my father. And there are 4 kids in my family growing up, but she was the only one. And the other 3 of us, myself included, had no recollection of this. And so this was a very, very significant weekend for me because it was the beginning of my journey to heal from my sexual abuse and trafficking in my family. How did you finally get help for your child's sexual abuse and trafficking? After this incident at my Overeaters Anonymous conference, I continued to run, which means I spent a number of years pushing this down and not wanting to look at it, which is normal. I continued to read a lot of self-help books. I remember the first book I read was The Courage to Heal, which is an excellent book for those of you who want to find a starting point. And I read it cover to cover, and I cried, and I cried, and I cried. At that time, I remember telling one of my siblings, the one that had expressed to me that she was sexually abused, and she told me that she had the same book in her closet, and she only could get to the first paragraph, and she closed it. So I hope one day that she can get on the journey that I'm on, but it's difficult, I know. I think I might have joined Al-Anon and tried to get some more help for children of alcoholics. And I actually attended a 12-step program for sexual abuse survivors in the United States, which was about an hour from here. And that group was a little bit scary for me because I didn't know anything about DID, which is dissociative identity disorder. And there were some individuals in that group that had it. So it was a little bit shocking to see how sometimes they would switch. And I heard some stories of people that had been in therapy for years and years for their sexual abuse and still weren't getting over it. I remember there was somebody in the program who was abused by a priest, and he would talk about some of his experiences also. Again, I hadn't started to get help from a therapist yet for my sexual abuse, and this was a little bit shocking for me to see this. And I didn't attend that long, but I did go enough to kind of get a feel for, you know, what sort of work maybe I would be getting into. So I started to search for different therapists. And every single time I went to a new therapist, I wanted to feel that this therapist was listening to me and heard my voice. And the biggest problem I had was I couldn't remember my childhood. So every single therapist that I went to, I would start off by saying, I have no memories, but I think I was sexually abused. And I was basing it all on my experience at the OA conference. But the main thing here, and the most important thing, was that I believed in me. I believed that I was sexually abused, even though I'm going to admit to you, there was one therapist I went to who was very young. And I remember telling her my story. I don't think she believed me. As a therapist, you shouldn't be a therapist if you're not believing what people are saying when they're coming into you. So I didn't go back to her, but I continued to look for a therapist that would believe my story and that would help me. And that was hard because, to be honest with you, there's not a lot of therapists that are trauma informed and can take you to the place that you need to go when you've been sexually abused. And in my case, I needed to go quite far. I didn't realize I had complex PTSD. I didn't realize I had the level of trauma that I had when I was starting out. Yeah, so it was difficult. Because each new therapist I went to, I had to tell my story again, and I kind of got tired of it. And I thought, how am I going to find the right therapist? And so I think for a number of years, I just, I'd go in and out of therapy. And I did finally find a man in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which was about 2.5 hours from where I live. And he was exactly what I needed at the time. Just like Overeaters Anonymous was exactly what I needed, this man was exactly what I needed. Don't think he was trauma informed per se, but he was what I needed at the time for what I was working through. And he was a very gentle man, and I actually ended up going to meet him for the first time because I needed to see him in person. And then after that, we did all our visits through phone. He was an older therapist for me, so I kind of looked at him as a father figure. We didn't really work on my sexual abuse memories, but he was there for what I needed him at the time, and I just needed someone to listen to me. I don't think I was quite ready to go into that deep healing that I needed to go into. So in 2017, I had another major turning point in my life. My ankle was giving me a lot of problems. I started physiotherapy on it, and then I eventually had to decide to get it operated on because there was nothing that was helping it at the time. And I was laid up on my back for about 7 weeks. And during that time, I was doing a lot of scrolling with my phone. And I also was getting the nudge at that time to try to find another therapist because I realized I needed some help. And I found a therapist online who was very trauma informed, and she herself has gone through a significant amount of trauma in her life and a significant amount of healing. So I emailed her, and I've been working with her since that time. So I've been in extensive therapy for 4 years for my trauma. And I think it was the first time in my life where I found someone who completely understood me, completely validated me, completely heard me, and believed my story. And it's because of this therapist that I'm here today to be able to talk to you about my healing journey. Can you talk about the intensive therapy you've had in the past few years that have brought you to the place that you are today? As I said, in 2017, I found a therapist that I'm working with right now. And my therapist specialized in treating individuals with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. She works with parts, and there is something called IFS, which stands for Internal Family Systems, which is a similar, I think, a psychotherapy that works in the same way that my own therapist works in. It is with her help that I have been able to uncover a lot of my repressed memories. Now, the second part of my therapy that I began once I was well established with my own therapist was body work. Now, I've tried 3 different types of body work. Some people call it energy work. I have tried craniosacral therapy, myofascial release, and I've also had Reiki. Those are all 3 forms of body work. As I've come to learn, trauma is stored in our body. What body work does, it moves some of the energy in your body so that some of this trauma can come up for you. And then when it does come up, it's also going to release some emotions. So it's very important that if you have any sort of body work done, that you are working with a well-established, trauma-informed therapist that's going to be able to help you through these emotions as they come up. So I worked with a bodywork therapist for about 2.5 years. Now I'm able to uncover and process my own memories as they come up. So I don't have a need for a bodywork therapist right now, but I still am working with my main therapist, and I think I probably will be continuing to work with her for quite a while. What is the hardest part of telling your story of being a survivor of sex trafficking and sexual abuse? When you grow up in a family where there was sexual abuse and trafficking, you are threatened at a very young age to keep quiet. So the hardest part of telling my story would be that no one's going to believe me. I think for some people, when they do try to come up with their story and they aren't validated, they can shut down again. When I first started my YouTube channel and my website, it was very difficult for me to become visible because that meant I was telling my story. And there is a heck of a lot of fear behind that I had to work through in order to get myself to tell my story. But I knew that part of my healing journey was to tell my story because I wanted to help people, and there was no way that I could keep silent any longer. I knew that I was in a position now where I could help people, and I think I was ready to do that because I had healed a significant amount of my trauma. I was able to stand firm in my truth, and I was not going to allow anyone to silence me again. How has your decision to tell your story affected others around you? When I look back on my life, especially as a young adult, I know that all I ever wanted to do was to heal. I talked about how I knew that there was always something wrong with me. And when I found out at that OA conference what was wrong with me, and I started the journey to heal, I had no idea what effect this would have on other people. Telling my story has become part of my healing because I've kept silent for too long. And unfortunately, when you do start to heal, there are people around you that can't support you for whatever reason. When I started to tell my story to my family of origin. It was unfortunately very hurtful because they couldn't support me, because they denied my story. They denied that it even happened. And there was one of my siblings tried to, I'm going to say, attack me, and tried to take down my YouTube video and tried to send some messages to me to really get me to go silent again. And this was something that I could never have predicted. I didn't know that I was going to lose people because of this. And in particular, I didn't know I was going to lose family members because of this. The only thing that I ever wanted was support. And it got to a point where all I wanted to do was to heal. And there was nothing that was going to stop me. And in order to do that, I needed to surround myself with safe people. And that meant if there were people that were coming at me and were not validating me, were not supporting me, and were trying to take me down, they couldn't be in my life anymore. So it's unfortunate that I have had to go no contact with my entire family of origin. And this decision did not come easily. I had to work through so many emotions. I had to do a lot of grieving as I let my family members go. Now, fortunately, I have 3 adult children of my own who are very supportive and who have been by my side through this healing journey. There have been periods of time where my adult children have come home to live with me for a bit, and they've seen the journey that I've been going through, and they've seen a lot of my pain. So there are going to be people that you lose on this journey, unfortunately. I mean, you have to be in a place where you are safe and you are validated. Because what happens when you're not, you actually end up getting re-traumatized, and it's really difficult to heal when you're in a situation where you're not being validated. And this is why you can find me on social media platforms now under the name CaroleCares. I have a message that I want to get out to all teens and young adults. Now, I know, even though my main focus, I think, is going to be on teens and young adults, I know that there are adults that are also getting support from it. I know how important it is to have a place that you can go to where you're not going to be shamed, you're not going to be judged, and someone's going to listen to you and believe your story. I've spent too long trying to find what's wrong with me, and at this point in my life, I can't be silenced anymore. It's just not possible. And you're going to know that every video I put out, I speak from a place of experience. And I always try to put a bit of my own story in it because that's what I've lived. I know what it means to deal with anxiety every day, to deal with depression, to be bullied, to have an eating disorder, to self-harm, and to want to end my life because the pain has just been too much. I've been there. And so I know what you're going through because I have these mental health challenges and I still continue to have them. I'm still healing. CaroleCares is the story of my own personal journey to heal my childhood trauma. And along the way, if I can help one other person, then my decision to break my silence has been worth every single bit of what I've had to go through in order to get to this place so I can tell my story. And I'm going to end this video with this. I want you to have compassion for yourself for what you're working through. And remember to stay safe. Bye for now.